Hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. In this video we are going to be talking about the NFs, the intuitive feelers. Intuitors, you will notice, are moderately different compared to their sensory counterparts. Now, even though NFs and NTs are only 1/4 of the population, I'd bet the majority of you watching this tested N because Myers-Briggs type psychology is a topic which tends to attract intuitive types. And in this video we'll be focusing again on the NFs, the INFP, the ENFP, the INFJ, and the ENFJ. Now, you'll notice S's are divided between perceiving and judging, P and J, whereas N's are divided between thinking and feeling, T and F. Why? Well, I'm not entirely sure why this is the common way of doing it. It seems unnecessary, as having intuitive perceivers and intuitive judgers would be equally sufficient. But I will say, though, that even though, as you will see, NJs and NPs have considerably different function stack, just as the S's, how they appear on the surface and the kind of habits, interests, lifestyles, etc. that they develop are moderately similar. So what's the big deal about the NS divide? Well, as usual, we'll get to the cognitive function explanation in a bit, but for now it will be sufficient to say that, like all Ns, NFs are more interested in sort of what-if or abstract concepts and possibilities. They may trust their intuitive feelings over what their senses are telling them, and they're particularly good at reading between the lines and information of whatever nature. Whereas sensors conceive things by starting with facts and then forming a larger picture, Ns try to grasp the whole picture at once and then work out the components. And like all Fs, feelers, NFs prefer to make decisions and judge things in accordance with a system of morals and values which they focus on upholding and refining throughout their lives, and will often aspire to create conditions which are fair and equitable for everyone, or, in essence, create harmony. As I've stressed, feeling in Myers-Briggs does not equate to emotions. Fs may have a greater focus on emotions and in fact a better understanding of them, but the irony is that thinkers may at times be worse at handling their emotions, but more on that later. NFs are usually bright, caring, friendly, sociable, and creative people. They will often place emphasis on human relationships and interactions both on the small and large scale, from the people close to them to a larger social picture constituting the relations of humankind. And they will often place great emphasis on ideals and values, though the values developed by intuitive feelers are not always necessarily in accordance with common or traditional values. They will often more independently develop an idea of how society should interact and exist, and in fact may view society's values as short-sighted, shallow, and immoral, being particularly critical of hypocrisy, inconsistency, and inauthenticity. These traits may encourage them to be somewhat rebellious and to become active in movements of either conservation of some things or change in others. This is not to say that they are stubborn or inflexible. Like most feelers, they are generally friendly and easygoing and only become combative when certain lines are crossed. They do, however, expect themselves to adhere to these morals very strongly and believe that doing so is necessary in their quest to connect with their inner selves or to find their place in the world. However, in relation to the people they care about, they will often try to see the best in them and will be more likely to reach out and help them than to be excessively critical and order them, we could say, into shape. However, when stressed or otherwise unhealthy, NFs may become selfish, defensive, argumentative, impulsive, or unreasonable. They may switch from attempting to see the best in others to seeing all the negative aspects of people and society, seeing the core of humanity as being shallow, helpless, and inherently corrupt. Furthermore, while striving for ideal relations and circumstances is admirable and useful, their subjective value systems and desires for other people may come into conflict with objective facts, which NFs may find to be cold, robotic, and inhuman in certain situations. NFs are usually capable of understanding logical reasoning and being logical, but they may have difficulty in conflicts in which a logical course of action is not exactly the most moral or ideal, especially if it affects others they care about. If NFs do not overcome this, they may stagnate or endure unnecessary pain in situations such as unhealthy relationships or unhealthy employment. Worse, they may begin to solve problems in negative ways. Because NFs have a higher sense of others' feelings and intentions, they may become manipulative and coerce others into things. Most are not, though, especially commonly, and most NFs come to balance these traits throughout their lives. Often, their focus on ideals and their skill with people and their ability to grasp the big picture well will attract them to subjects like philosophy, literature, sociology, politics, psychology, etc. And, as you will see, many notable figures within these fields throughout history have been NFs. Now, of course, as usual, to truly understand these types, we have to look at the cognitive functions beneath the surface. So here are the 4 types again: the INFP, the ENFP, the INFJ, and the ENFJ. And here are their associated cognitive functions. So, as you can see, like I said, NFs may be similar people, but they often arrive to these similarities with fairly different decision-making preferences and perspectives, if that makes sense. Essentially, the circuitry is a bit different, and, as you can see, no shared functions. They're both intuitive feelers because their 2 lead functions are both intuition and feeling, but they're opposite focuses. NFJs are NI and FE, introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, while NFPs are FI and NE, introverted feeling and extroverted intuition. With their inferior functions likewise, of course, being opposites, and of course you see here the flip-flopping of function preferences between introverts and extroverts of the same type. So, I've said there are differences, but the question is, what differences are they? So let's break it down, starting with the opposite intuition functions. So what's the difference of the introverted intuition of NFJs and the extroverted intuition of NFPs? Well, of the four dichotomies, the difference between NI and NE is probably the most difficult to understand, maybe even the least solid difference in Myers-Briggs. They're both functions focused on ideas and concepts and possibilities, but NI functions more on connecting concepts to fit a larger picture, whereas NE is a bit more like idea generation or brainstorming, sort of what you might expect from what introverted and extroverted seem to imply. So INFJs and ENFJs are going to focus more on tying points together to reach a single or a more refined understanding of things, kind of like a system building process. They may just intuitively know how or why something is the way it is, and this may be expressed by moments where they pause and say something like, wait a second, I know exactly what's going on here, something like that. And even though they're very sociable, they, particularly INFJs, may seem to daydream a lot and seem kind of pensive. All intuitors can be somewhat pensive, and NFJs are of course no exception, needing to sort things out in their head from time to time, especially introverts. NE in INFPs and ENFPs, however, is a bit more random. Not in the sense that NFPs have short attention spans or something. Often when an NFP gets interested in something, they focus on it with a lot of enthusiasm, but they do kind of jump around from topic to topic and are very receptive to new ideas, so much so that they may feel uncomfortable making up their minds about some things. ENFPs who lead with NE especially, because there's always something new to explore or to do, they may develop new interests and change their hobbies within just a few months and then come back to them much later, which is a major contributor to why NFPs are a little bit more bothered by routine than NFJs. They're very good at brainstorming and idea generation, as I said, as well, and they may be focused on taking things and trying to find new ways to do things with them, which are perhaps seemingly new, original, or random. We've talked about NE before as an inferior function, but as a lead function, NFPs are usually very good at taking in something and then asking, well, what if we do this to it? What if we make it like this? How about if we change this? Things like that. They're very good at playing with concepts. Now the difference in feeling. Extroverted feeling versus introverted feeling. We've talked about introverted feeling leads before with the ESFP and the ISFP, and it's essentially the same function in INFPs and ENFPs, but the way it's expressed in combination with intuition is moderately different. FI is a function which judges the world by a system of values and morals which the NFP will spend their lives trying to connect with, refine, and exhibit in themselves. They're very aware of their sense of right and wrong. Keep in mind, though, that this is a more independent sense of right and wrong. They may be unusually virtuous, expressing morals that much of society would not, or on the other side, they may develop some fairly crooked morals and be fairly disagreeable people. They're also very aware of their own emotions. Even when they feel emotional or overwhelmed, they are usually more aware of what they're feeling and why, and are accordingly more steady in dealing with things and monitoring their emotions, whereas FEs can be 0 to 100 if particular emotions are provoked in certain ways, but more on FE in a second. Like SFPs, NFPs want to refine their morals and act in accordance with them, but while SFPs may be more focused on doing this by getting out into the world and learning how it is, I guess you could say, NFPs, in combination with NE, often prefer to do this with ideas, concepts, symbols, metaphor, etc. They're a bit philosophic in how they ponder things. This comes out in a smaller scale when NFPs are explaining or arguing. They tend to use a lot of metaphors to convey their introverted feeling reasoning. On a larger scale, though, they'll probably take interest in things like literature, music, art, certain sciences, etc. Literature is a good example. Both NFPs and NFJs can be excellent writers, but a very good example of the FI and NE combination in action is Tolkien, an INFP, and his books, more commonly enjoyed as movies, The Lord of the Rings. Middle-earth is a wonderfully developed fictional world, and to credit him, much more so than a lot of popular fictional worlds of our time. There's histories of entire fictional civilizations. He covers the whole history of his world in detail. He invents languages, things like that. The kind of things that an NE would just enjoy creating and a level of creativity that they're fully capable of. But looking at the story specifically, it's full of symbolism. Taking the One Ring in particular, it can symbolize a lot of negative traits of humankind, such as the desire for power, to the point where people like Gandalf or Aragorn or Elrond feel like they can't handle it, so the task falls on Frodo, who is, by the way, typed as an INFP as far as fictional characters go, which typing fictional characters can be awkward to do and lead to a lot of mistakes, but it falls on him because even though Frodo is just this little guy from an unimportant place, He is courageous and he has unbreakable virtue, and Tolkien obviously implies that this is the kind of character which is necessary for humankind to triumph over evil, which is very, very stereotypical of NFP writing. But anyway, that's my nerdy tangent example. Let's talk about FE in the NFJs. Like FI, FE is also expressed differently in intuitive types than their SFJ counterparts, which we talked about before. FE is a function dedicated toward a focus on the feelings and intentions of others. In essence, it's very focused on people, and in fact, FEs may tend to be strongly affected by how others, especially people they care about, are feeling, to the point where the emotions of others can influence their emotions much more significantly, driving them to try to help others accordingly. I don't mean to be misleading here though. This does not necessarily mean that NFJs are pushovers. They may accommodate others in certain ways, but may be very, very adamant in their principles and are much more likely to try to convince people that their position or belief is right or beneficial rather than silence it for group harmony. And importantly, not all of them want to be motherly caretakers who just love everybody. NFJs may be very good with people. ENFJs in particular are usually good at breaking the ice with people, whereas INFJs are quieter and prefer their smaller circles and such. But a focus on people and increased intuitive awareness of their emotions and intentions does not necessarily mean a love of people. And in fact, from personal experience, and this is just personal experience, so take it with a grain of salt, from the NFJs I know, several of them have expressed annoyance with how unpleasant the general people can be, and several of them aren't even going into professions where they'll be working with people. But combined with their intuitive sense, when they do work with people, not only are they obviously good at it, they like it to be for a higher purpose, and this is often what makes them exceptional leaders. And we can see this type of leadership in leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Bernie Sanders, Gandhi, Thomas Jefferson, etc., all NFJs. Despite their ability to help others, they're not always good with their own emotions though. They may struggle with their own feelings, they may feel unappreciated if their efforts go unnoticed, and if certain lines are crossed, they may, as I said, go just 0 to 100 and react very strongly. Now for the difference in the thinking functions. NFJs prefer TI, introverted thinking, and NFPs prefer TE, extroverted thinking. TI is a focus on organizing one's understanding of the world into an internal logical framework. It causes people to try to consistently refine their understanding of things and connect them into a sort of logical system. In NFJs, this function is, of course, often superseded by FE and NI, but NFJs with a particularly strong TI sense tend to enjoy logic or puzzles or math. They may like science or technology, and they're very good at systematizing things. From the perspective of an INTP, it's always been interesting to me to see NI and TI work together, sort of TI in the background systemizing the intuitions, and when you combine this with FE, you may get something like all of this, Myers-Briggs types in the cognitive functions. There's some debate over INTP or INFJ, but these two types that can be actually kind of similar on the surface too. But a lot of people believe that Carl Jung was an INFJ. Carl Jung is, of course, the psychologist who developed the cognitive functions on which Myers-Briggs types are based. TI also, of course, comes out when NFJs are stressed or when it's encouraged. When they're confronted and arguing with people who are being excessively emotional, they become very logical in their response and critical of people displaying extreme emotion for no reason, especially if it's just disrupting harmony. NFPs prefer TE, extroverted thinking, which is of course focused on the efficient organization of the external environment, planning, organizing, refining, moving things, etc. Even though it is of course superseded by the more preferred functions, this of course comes out in multiple ways in NFPs. It comes out in how they organize things. They may have sort of moments of enthusiasm where they want to clean and organize everything and get things in order. It comes out when they're put into leadership positions. Not all, especially INFPs, enjoy leadership, but sometimes they do, and when they do, they may display organizational behavior more in accordance with how a TE lead would act than an NFJ would with FE, using extroverted thinking to enforce their justification of FI to establish an ideal order. Essentially, NFPs tend to be very relaxed, easygoing people who are open to suggestions, which can cause them to be indecisive, but when circumstances require it, they'll make decisions represented by TE and enter into a kind of TCOB mode. Furthermore, it can draw them to take interest in certain things such as engineering, sciences, math, computers, law, etc., and is also, of course, apparent in teaching and social work positions which NFPs tend to be attracted to. When confronted with an argument and sufficiently angry, NFPs will often express FI with both NE and TE, where they may try to get to the bottom line of things, perhaps very adamantly, and say, this is just the way that it has to be, or something like that. And the final function is, of course, sensing. NFPs prefer SI, NFJs prefer SE. SI, as we focused on more in depth in the SJ video, is a function dedicated toward associating experiences to form a larger internal framework of why things happen and what happens when those things happen. And SIs accomplish this by being very focused on specific facts and details about the things which take place. Often, they will use this function to support and help develop FI and NE. INFJs and ENFJs prefer SE, extroverted sensing, so they may have a tendency to be a little bit more athletic and coordinated. They may enjoy sports or physical activities somewhat more. They may, in combination with FE, feel an urge to go out and do things with others. They may have a fairly good sense of fashion, and they may at times be a little bit more spontaneous or impulsive. Now, an NFP may be a little bit impulsive sometimes too, but in many situations they may take a few seconds to make up their minds about things, whereas an NFJ may, especially if encouraged, be more likely to just jump right into something, and whether or not that is a good thing is of course relative to the individual and the situation they're placed in. So, in conclusion, though NFPs and NFJs have opposite function stacks, they turn out on the surface to be somewhat similar people. They're often likable, intelligent, independent-minded, and caring people. Their ability to grasp large concepts easily and their intuitive insight into the functioning of the world has been responsible for a great number of positive and, often, much-needed changes in human history. And their desire to improve themselves and others will often lead them to fulfill the role of standard-bearer or lead or encourage others to an ideal on a small scale, such as helping a friend or resolving a conflict at work, or a larger scale, such as leading the way for an improvement for the whole of society. And now for some NF statistics. NFs in general constitute 16.4% of the US population. The ENFP makes up 8.1%, the INFP makes up 4.4%, the ENFJ makes up 2.5%, and the INFJ makes up 1.4%, with the INFJ being the rarest type of all. Famous ENFPs include Mark Twain, Alan Watts, Che Guevara, Robin Williams, and Ellen DeGeneres. Famous INFPs include Shakespeare, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Edgar Allan Poe, Kurt Cobain, and John Lennon. Famous ENFJs include Cicero, Barack Obama, Johann von Goethe, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Jennifer Lawrence. And famous INFJs include Plato, Niels Bohr, Leon Trotsky, Marilyn Manson, and Cate Blanchett. So that's the intuitive feelers in a nutshell. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the NTs, the intuitive thinkers, and we'll wrap up the analysis videos. We might have a few Myers-Briggs videos after that, but that will be the last of the analysis videos. And to catch that video and for more videos like that and on many other subjects, be sure to check out Fire of Learning and subscribe. Thank you for watching.